And you just hit on some very basic expectations of frameworks that are not only cyber frameworks in the banking industry. For instance, it has to do with FFIEC, and it has to do with understanding how the data flows and when are you purging it, disposing of it, and are you testing it. Just very basic things that came out a few decades ago. But let's talk about ownership of data, because we have grown up thinking that the organization owns the data. However, that has changed, right? So in the world of privacy, you see it differently. How does that work? How during a ransomware attack, do you see individuals latching on to, or at least those affected within the data would say, well, but we own the data?
It's a tricky area, because in the past, here in America, primarily, we have not attributed a lot of value to our personal data and our privacy. It's been something that we don't take it as seriously as many in maybe the EU do, and treasure it in that way that it's like to them a fundamental right. To us, it's something to barter, right? To make things more efficient or quick or whatever. So companies have built upon that and said, well, if they don't care about it, then we don't care about it. It's ours. We collected it. We're going to use it however we want. And if something happens, then, so be it. Now, that's where the what we call the breach notification laws came in, right? Because breach notification laws are privacy-based. Typically, they only apply to personal information, sensitive or PII, personally identifiable information. Or in Texas, we call it SPI. Sensitive personal information. Either way, it's personal. It's not business data. It's not trade secrets. It's not, financial records or whatever else. And so our privacy laws, our breach notification laws say if a company is holding this data that belongs to another, it's about them. It's regarding them. So they're the data subject. Then if something breaches the confidentiality of that data by an unauthorized access or taking or use, you have to give them notice of that. That's the essence of our breach notification laws. And so where the challenge comes in is when you have multiple parties to a business relationship. And let's say you have one company that's using the services of another vendor that now is housing or processing that personal information that company one acquired from the data subjects or about the data subjects. And a lot of businesses tend to think if I'm trusting this data to another company, then I'm no longer responsible for it. And that's a problem, because they are still responsible for it. And the fact that they have entrusted it to someone else doesn't abrogate that responsibility to the ultimate data subject. And so, putting it in Dropbox and having your Dropbox get compromised does not mean you can go, hey, no, put it in Dropbox, not my problem. People have thought that for a long time, and that's just not the case.
We have added risk by adding parties.
That's right. We do, because the best, most mature way of looking at this under the U.S. framework is to look at our HIPAA laws and look at how the concept of a covered entity and the business associates that go downstream from that covered entity. And in that context, the covered entity is always responsible for the data, no matter how many levels of business associates downstream they hand it off to, or that business associate hands it off, or so on and so forth, down to those nth parties. You're still responsible for it. So you've got to make sure you're doing business with trusted vendors, that you're auditing them, and that you're maintaining some level of control and only giving them what they need.
The value of the data. We have insurance companies looking at data in a particular way, and then we have organizations looking at it perhaps in another. Could you walk us through how a lawyer sees valuable data?
Absolutely. And I think there's one more point to add on to this that ransomware took care of. So from probably 2013, right around the time of the Target, Home Depot, Neiman Marcus breaches, till several years, when I would talk to companies about this cyber risk, I would always get pushback of, but our data is not that valuable. We're just insert whatever named company here, or we're just a small company. We don't have data that's that important like a Target or a Home Depot. And the interesting thing about ransomware is in a ransomware attack, they don't care how valuable your data is. You care how valuable it is because you have it for a reason, and that's to run your business. And they know if they can take that away from you, then they can undermine your very ability to operate. And that's the whole fundamental way that their extortion works. So the first point there is that it doesn't matter who you are, how large you are, how small you are, whether you're technical, whether you're a pizza company or what, it's valuable to you, and they know that. So from there, really, when we're talking about valuing data, one of the most valuable forms of data is trade secrets, right? And trade secrets are often protected by contracts, and that's something a lot of people overlook. I mentioned earlier, the privacy-based laws. Those are legislatively enacted laws that govern data. But something most people don't think about is that we have far more law being written into private contracts between companies than we'll ever see legislatively enacted. And so our contracts create the laws between the party, and many times companies have no idea what their contractual obligations are. They have no idea what their contractual rights are to investigate and audit data practices of their business partners. And so understanding that's a really important aspect as well. But one of the top places I'm asked often is about valuing data, personal data, is when we're talking about assessing the risk of a potential data breach. And so, a company may say, I have 100,000 records of personal information, for our workforce and our customer base, or I may have 100 million or whatever. What's our risk? And a lot of people like to go and pull like the Ponemon statistics numbers and go, $200 and something per record, right? In my experience, I don't see the numbers being that high, but I think there is some kind of a factor you can place, whether it's a couple of dollars per record, whether it's 5, 10, whatever. When you're dealing with these exponentially large ranges, it's going to be huge in volume. And so we have to look at that on a case-by-case basis. If it's health records or something of that nature, the data is probably going to be more valuable. It's probably going to be more valuable in the black market, which means there's a higher likelihood there will be fraud with it. If it's credit card numbers these days, it might have very little value because the credit cards will get canceled and reissued, and and so there's just, it's something you've got to dig in on and look at in each case. But, the value of the data impacted is only one factor when you're looking at the cost of a breach or the cost of a cyber attack, because you have your forensics costs, which are very expensive. Believe it or not, we don't work for free. So you have legal costs. Right. And then if we are talking about personal information, you have your notification costs. Now, most notification frameworks here in the U.S. require mailing a letter to each individual. In those letters, we usually provide at least a year, maybe 2 years, depending on the jurisdiction of credit monitoring. So if you want to get a quick idea of how quickly these things can get expensive, just think if you have 10 million records for individuals and you have to do a mailing to 10 million people with a credit product and then go through all that processing, right? 10 million small in today's world. The way we gobble up and hold on to data, 100 million records. What we just saw a cell phone provider this week get breached, and I forget the number, but it was, I think, close to 500,000. I mean, no, 500 million or something. I mean, it was very large. Just do the math there. It's huge, right? And so when we're looking at these costs, it's easy to see how quickly they get so catastrophically expensive.
Back to the value. Back to the value of the data as well as the ransomware trends. Are you finding any sophistication in terms of what systems they attack based on the type of data, or is more about bringing the operation to the knees regardless of how valuable that data is outside of the enterprise?
The bulk of the value of a ransomware attack is still the encryption. We had one recently that was in the hospitality industry, and we knew they stole some data. We didn't know how much. They had screenshots of data, and they posted some on their shame site. Okay, so we knew they had something, and we knew it was personal in nature, and they had gone through what they stole and carefully plucked out particularly sensitive, like some credit card numbers. They plucked out some very personally embarrassing things from some of the executives that they shouldn't have had in there on the company network at all from the beginning, right? And so it created a very high sense of urgency. They had demanded $500,000 ransom. And what we did is we knew we had backups that were viable and could be restored quickly. So we negotiated to get us time to do forensics to see what did they steal so we could make an informed decision. And when we were able to tell them we no longer need the decryption key, the price dropped from 500,000 down to around 100,000 because they knew that's the big leverage point, right? The sensitivity of the data is not that important anymore. And so in this particular case, we did forensics. We found out through pretty reliable information that they only had stolen a small amount of information, and they captured some screenshots to make it look like they had more than they really had. And so that helped us to negotiate further and deal with them. But in some cases, when they know they have something particularly sensitive and particularly important, like a customer database, with all the, sensitive data points in there about individuals, then they're going to demand a higher price. And then there's one other factor here. I'm a huge believer in cyber insurance. Every company should have cyber insurance. The amount of data you have, the type of data, all of that goes into how much coverage you need for the reasons we talked about. But one of the things they're doing now is the bad guys are getting in and looking for insurance policies in your network. They're looking for your financial statements. They're looking for anything they can find to help inform them how much the company's capable of paying. And then they base their demands on that when they can find it.
Fascinating.
It is. I mean, we still have in our mind this notion that these hackers are living in a tent on the side of a mountain somewhere. These are sophisticated business operations. They have a distributor, affiliate marketing type model set up. They have websites with customer service portals where you can go chat with them. I mean, it is a sophisticated business that they have set up. And they're going to do everything they can to try to maximize their profits.